بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, in our lessons on Imam Shurumbolali's Maraqi al-Falah, his own commentary on his great summary of the rulings of purification, prayer and fasting, Nurul Ilah, we are completing the section on the fiqh related to relieving oneself and cleaning oneself after relieving oneself. And these are significant because these are things we do every day. And there's prophetic teachings regarding these matters. And they say, "Man tahawana fil qalil, tahawana fil kathir." Right? That whoever is negligent about the little things will be negligent about the big things. Right? So it's not; these aren't small, right? Because the mabda, the basis of these matters is quite simple, which is to be conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to be restrained in one's actions. Right? Right? So there's great wisdom why there's teachings on these things. When some of the Quraysh mocked the Sahaba who become Muslim, that does Muhammad tell you about everything? Right? Said soon he'll be telling you even how to relieve yourself. And the Sahaba said, yes, he does. And they explained, because he teaches us, they mentioned to enter with the left and this and that and these things, because these are all ways to be conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? That's the central wisdom of the Sunnah, is that it's a means to be conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and also to do things in ways that are pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So it instills a sense of being within us. That even in the apparently mundane, there's meaning to it, there's purpose to it, there's excellence in it, there's consciousness of Allah in it. So it turns the mundane into opportunities of turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are significant things. And these are things that are repeated daily, so they inculcate these meanings of restraint, of purposefulness, of doing things right, of doing things with consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But and these meanings are supposed to carry over into other components of one's life and living. So that they're not qaleel. We stop towards the end of the section on istinja with the things that are disliked to do when relieving oneself. So he says, وَالْبَوْلُ قَائِمًا إِلَّا مِنْ عُذْرٍ. And it is disliked to urinate while standing, unless there is an excuse. So he says, in the commentary, قال الإمام أبو الإخلاص حسن بن عمار الشرنبلالي رحمه الله تعالى ونفعنا به وبكم ويكره البول قائما. It's makruh. لتنجسه غالبا, because it would normally make one najis, because the najasa could come on one. This is of course غلبة الخوف, not غلبة الحصول. The غلبة of the خوف, غالبا أي لغلبة الخوف, لغلبة الخوف النجاسة, right? Not غلبة الحصول, right? Generally there would be a fear of najasa getting on one, not that there would be, in the general case, the najasa would in fact get on one, right? So, the Prophet ﷺ, نهى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن البول قائما. The Prophet ﷺ interdicted urinating while standing. And but the Prophet ﷺ was seen urinating standing rarely. Amongst them is the hadith of al-Mughira bin Shu'bah. Right? أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أتى سباتة قوم فبال قائما ثم توضأ, etc. The Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم came to the garbage dump of the people, who's outside the city, and being away from people, you've seen from a distance, he relieved himself while standing. Sayyidah Aisha never saw the Prophet urinate while standing. This is one of the things that she disagreed with the Sahaba about, that he never did it. But they say, al-muthbit muqaddam ala al-nafi. The one who affirms is given precedence over the one who negates. But the udhr is understood. Right? You're in a garbage dump, you don't want to squat in a garbage dump. Right? Illa min udhr. Now what is the ruling of, there's a nahi, the Prophet forbade it. Al-aslu fi nahi, the nahi is the opposite of the amr. Al-aslu fi al-amr, al-ijab. The basis of the command is it affirms a duty. The basis of a prohibition, it's interdiction. It's al-mana'. It's either haram or makruh tahriman. There's an exception. There are some exceptions. So the command itself, that's what it indicates, but as al-Khadimi and others have mentioned, والأصل أن الأمر إذا تعلق بالآداب والهيئات كان للاستحباب غالبا. The basis, the command, if it relates to adab and hayat, to propriety and the right way of doing something, the basis is that it be for recommendation, generally. Why is that significant? Because if you look in Kitab al-Adab, for example, from Riyadh al-Salihin, there's many chapters of the things the Prophet said to do or not to do. And most of the adab relate to recommendation or dislikedness. But there's also a meaning of propriety. For example, is it sinful to pick your nose in public? Is it sinful? No. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a sin is something that has next worldly consequence, right? Like you're not going to be punished in hell for picking your nose in this dunya. Right? But the adab have a ma'na ukhrawi and they have a ma'na dunyawi. They have a next worldly meaning, they also have a worldly meaning, that this is unbecoming. If you eat while making big noises, you're not going to go to hell for that. But it's improper in this dunya. Right? Because it's غير مستحسن بين الناس. Other things. Right? If you're eating from your own plate, you're drooling into your plate, all kinds of things. Bad manners. Bad manners won't get you to hell, but it may leave you alone in this world. Right? So there's an aspect related to one's dignity as well in these adab. So that's very significant. And the adab instill within us many virtues. And there's a wonderful work by Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda called Min Adab al-Islam. It's a small work but full of benefit. And we covered it in an online course, which is now an on-demand course called Islamic Manners. It's a wonderful text, and we talk about some of the hikmah of the adab al-shari'iyya, of these adab. But they root virtue into one's life. Anyways, so what is the ruling of urinating while standing? When there's no excuse, the majority of the ulama said that the dislike in it is karahat tanzih. Right? And this is quoted from Sharh al-Mishkah of Mullah al-Qari. And وفي البناية, Binaya is al-Aini's Sharh on the Hidayah from al-Tahawi. He says, لا بأس, there's nothing wrong with it. Meaning it's just better not to. Right? Now, of course, using a public urinal and stuff, there's other things which is also has in front of people and has a possibility of kashf al-awra, etc. So it has other improper meanings. So it is somewhat disliked to urinate while standing. So this one's habit should be to sit, to squat or sit, unless there's an excuse. The place is filthy. Right, for example, إلا بالعذر كوجع بصلبه, such as one is in pain. They say this is in one's sulb, in one's private area. ويكره في محل التوضؤ, and is disliked to urinate in the place one is making wudu. لأنه يورث الوسوسة. Now this does not mean in the washroom. Some people misunderstand that. In the place you make wudu, right? This is if you're using the same place such that it would lead to waswasa. So, for example, so the toilet bowl's clogged, so you decide to urinate in the sink. I've been asked this question. What's the hukum of urinating in the sink if the toilet is clogged? Right? And be makruh. Because then, one for yourself, because then there's najasa all over the place. Now you're going to make wudu from there. Even if you rinse it, you could get doubts. So that's the kind of thing that would be disliked, right? To urinate in the sink, unless you cleaned it fully, right? Or, for example, to urinate in the tub because then when you take a shower, it may lead to waswasa. Right? That's what would be disliked. In محل التوضؤ, in the place where you make wudu, because it leads to waswasa, right? But if it's such that you've cleaned up and so on, so like so that there'll be no residues of najasa, etc. Of course, don't get bad ideas. Urinating in the sink or the tub, if it's your own, you can pretty much do whatever you want. It's bad adab and foolish. But if it belongs to another or is shared, then لا يحل التصرف في ملك الغير من غير إذن. Right? It's not permitted to use that which belongs to another without their permission. صريحا أو دلالة, whether explicit or by indication. Right? So that's, anyways, we don't want to belabor that point. لأنه يورث الوسوسة, because it leads to waswasa. Then he says something that is stated by some scholars, but Imam al-Tahtawi disagrees with it, and most of the scholars said the contrary. He says, وَيُسْتَحَبُّ دخول الخلاء بثوب غير الذي يصلي فيه. It is recommended to enter the toilet with garments other than the one that one is going to be praying in. And the reason, so the reasoning for this is just to keep one's garments free of najasa. Some explain what Imam Kashurbulani is saying is that it's recommended to wear the best of one's clothing. So if you have a jubba, you have a imama, you take that into the toilet, then the optimal clothing to pray in would be za'id. And that could, it's more awkward to use for the toilet. So there, you would remove that extra clothing, right? The jubba, the shal, the imama, right? Etc. وإلا يحترز ويتحفظ من النجاسة. Otherwise, one is careful and guard oneself from getting filth onto oneself. This particularly in public toilets and stuff, and places where يكثر وجود النجاسة. Right? used by many people, amongst them those who aren't careful about najasa. So you see, the mashayikh, for example, before going to the toilet, they take off their jubba, for example, they take off their imama. So there, but preparing separate clothing to go into the toilet would be a type of bid'ah, right? But the way the mashayikh have interpreted يستحب دخول الخلاء بثوب غير الذي أي يتجرد عن الثياب الزائدة. Okay. ويكره دخول الخلاء ومعه شيء مكتوب فيه اسم الله تعالى أو قرآن. It's disliked to enter the toilet with something in which the Quran, a divine name is written, or Quran. أو شيء معظم, right? Or something that is worthy of respect. Right? So it's common, and the Imam al-Tahtawi relates a number of hadiths related to this. Amongst them, كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا دخل الخلاء نزع خاتمه. He would take off his ring, because his ring said it had the shahada on it, right? It had Muhammadun Rasulullah, right? And it's best to take it off, right? So if one has something with a divine name, such as a ring, or for women, a bracelet, or the like, if possible, it's best to take it off. If not, then to either tuck it in so it's not bariz, so it doesn't appear. So with a ring, for example, put it in a safe pocket, or the like. But sometimes it's not possible. Like if a ring gets tight, then one turns it inward and clenches one's wrist. Okay, but that becomes a problem on the left hand. It's worst, of course, on the left hand. So it shouldn't be apparent. But it's best to keep it out. Similarly, one needs to be very careful with the mushaf. Of course, it is exceedingly bad enough. There's some people. It is a good thing that there's some groups that encourage people to remove takalluf with respect to their connection with the Quran. So they encourage, keep a copy of the Quran handy. So some people, because they have a lot of adab, etc., they only keep the Quran in a raised place, etc. That ta'zeem is good, but the practicality of keeping a mushaf with you is also good. But if one takes an actual copy of a mushaf, then one should leave it outside the washroom. Right? When I was in university, sometimes Allah wants to teach you a lesson. 3 times we ran into a mushaf in the toilet. Twice in the masjid, 2 different masajid, once where we used to pray at the university. So there are people who are just keeping the mushaf in their back pocket. Keep it handy. That's bad manners with the Quran. If one keeps it on oneself, one keeps it in an elevated place and with respect. It's good to keep a copy of the Quran with one, but with adab. Okay? And many of the contemporary mashayikh who are very familiar with technology still prefer keeping a physical copy of the mushaf with them rather than just on a phone. Why? Because it has the benefits of, this has the hukum of the mushaf. So although it's a greater responsibility, there's reward in holding the mushaf and all the fullness of the ahkam that relate to it. It's aqrab ila sunnah. And there's greater ma'ani of ta'zeem. And this is only there for Quran. The phone, one uses it for all kinds of things. Okay? So there's nothing wrong with using it on the phone, but there's ma'ani of ta'zeem that are important to keep in mind. Anyways, so one either leaves these things outside, anything with the name of Allah or the names of the prophets, or itself sacred. A hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So many groups, they print t-shirts or sweatshirts with a Quranic verse or praise Allah or whatever. What are you going to do when you enter the washroom? Especially if you make a t-shirt, is someone really going to take their t-shirt off to use the toilet? That's a serious problem. Okay? And there's details related to this you can find in Nahlawi, in the Durr al-Mubaha, في الحظر الإباحة. It says, وَنُهِيَ عَنْ كَشْفِ عَوْرَتِهِ قَائِمًا. It has been interdicted to uncover one's awrah while standing. And this is نهي تنزيه وأدب. This is an نهي تنزيه وأدب. The matter of adab, and you know what تمسك بما هو أولى, and doing what is superior, right? Because the asl in كشف العورة is لا تكشف العورة إلا لحاجة. One doesn't uncover one's awrah unless there's a need, right? So there's a mas'ala. What is the hukm of kashf al-awrah fil khalwa? What's the ruling of uncovering one's awrah when alone? In the Hanafi madhab, there are two opinions on this. The relied upon position is it's وجوب كشف العورة ولو في الخلوة إلا للحاجة بقدرها. It's wajib to cover one's awrah even when alone. And what's مقصود بالعورة here for women is أدنى العورة, is ما بين السرة والركبة, right? Why? Because the Sahaba asked the Prophet ﷺ about covering when alone, and the Prophet ﷺ said, the hadith in Abu Dawood and elsewhere, Allahu ahaqqu an yustaha minhu min al-nas. Allah is more deserving of one's hayat than people are. I'll be looking at the ahkam of kashf al-awrah and satr al-awrah when we get to the prayer. That's a stronger opinion than that. Illa lil-haja. Right? And haja, need, al-haja ta'khudhu min ahkam al-darura. Need takes off the rulings of necessity. So they say, al-darura tuqaddaru biqadariha. Necessity is limited to the extent of the necessity. وكذا الحاجة. ما ثبت لحاجة يقدر بقدر حاجة. Something that's allowed because of the need is limited to the extent of the need. Which is why we see the hikmah al-tashri'ah is what's the sunnah of how you dress. The sunnah is to dress and undress sitting down. Most people ignore it. And of the wisdoms of that is reducing the extent of the uncovering. From the sunnah, what does one put on first or take off first? One puts on that which leaves less of one's body uncovered. So it depends what you're wearing. One dresses without takalluf in a manner. So if one's wearing a long shirt and trousers, one take the trousers off, put on trousers, then take the one's long shirt off. Right? It's asta. So similarly, it's understood, and this, I believe is mentioned Ahsan al-Fatawa of Mufti Rashid Ahmed Luthianoui. It's Ahsan al-Fatawa. He has a bahth on this. That it's understood that most of the wudu of the Prophet ﷺ was done, most of the ghusl of the Prophet ﷺ was done sitting down. And there's indications of a whole bunch of hadith. A number of the hadith commentators have pointed that out. Again, why? Because it's astar. So in general, it's permitted to uncover when there's need, but to the extent of the need. So you see, in the adab of the shara, these are not obligations. Someone didn't do them, they're not earning sin or lane, but they're leaving what's better, is تقليل كشف العورة قدرا ووقتا, is to reduce the extent of uncovering the awrah in extent and duration. Okay. So from that, for example, نهي عن كشف العورة قائما أي لقضاء الحاجة, when relieving oneself. Okay? Why? حتى يدنو من الأرض, until one is closer to the ground. تحرزا عن كشف العورة بغير ضرورة, so that one avoids uncovering one's awrah without necessity. And Imam Tahtawi explains this out. لقول سيدنا أنس رضي الله تعالى عنه, because of the words of Sayyidina Anas رضي الله تعالى عنه. This is related by al-Tirmidhi. Right? كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم إذا أراد الحاجة لم يرفع ثوبه حتى يدنو من الأرض. The Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم, if he needed to fulfill his need, meaning to relieve himself, he didn't raise his garments until he got close to the ground. And in Sunan al-Tirmidhi, for example, there's a chapter, باب ما جاء في الاستتار عند الحاجة, a chapter on what has been related on remaining covered when relieving oneself. Right? And in Sunan Abi Dawud, the chapter is called باب كيف التكشف عند الحاجة. How does one uncover when relieving oneself? And this, of course, points to the importance of reading hadith, not just fiqh. Because many of the fuqaha are not that concerned about the adab. There's common sense. That those are things that, like, who are you? You're a follower of the Prophet. The obvious things you should know already. Right? Okay. Fiqh has to do with the subtleties and the limits and these things, but like, it's لا يغني عن عن الحديث, right? So, and there's many other hadiths related to that, right? And right, and so the stronger of the two opinions, and this is Imam al-Haskafi mentions this in Dur al-Mukhtar, is wujubu satr al-awra illa lil-haja. When there's a need, then the duty to cover one's basic awra is lifted. So even if one just uncovers there, to the extent of the need, it's fine. But what's more proper is to reduce one's uncovering in those situations, right? And you can see the many hadiths that have come related to that. And then he mentioned, Imam Tahtawi in his Hashia mentions a few other things. So ويستحب غسل يده بعد الفراغ. It is recommended to wash one's hands after one finishes relieving oneself. Right? وإن طهرت بطهارة المحل. Even though in making istinja, one's hand is also considered to be clean. مبالغة في التنظيف. To be more complete in one's cleaning. Right? ونهي عن كشف العورة قائما. Let's go back to the text. It says وذكر الله تعالى. And likewise, it's interdicted in the toilet to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? وذكر الله تعالى وكذا الكلام. So remembrance of Allah at the toilet is makruh tahriman. And speech is makruh tanzihan مع مخالفة الأدب. Right? فلا يحمد إذا عطس. So one does not say Alhamdulillah if one sneezes at the toilet. ولا يشمت عاطسا. And one does not respond to the one who sneezes when they say Alhamdulillah, but saying Yarhamukallah. Now this is a neglected sunnah, that Tashmeet al-Atis is wajib in the Hanafi school. Wajib kifayah. So if someone sneezes and says Alhamdulillah, someone in the gathering must say Yarhamukallah. Right? If it's someone you don't know of the opposite sex, whatever, or it's not appropriate, one says it to oneself. Right? But not saying it is sinful. So that's the command related to it. So, ذكر الله المأكول تحريما, speech is مأكول تنزيها. ولا يرد سلاما, and one does not respond to salam, because the salam is a dhikr. Okay? ولا يجيب مؤذنا, and this is at the toilet. So, this is at the toilet, not in the washroom. If you're in the washroom and the adhan is being given, you can respond to it within oneself, to oneself. Right? Just as in the washroom, one, if one's using the washroom to make dhikr, to make wudu, one does all the dhikr of the wudu. That's the difference between the toilet and the washroom. By toilet we mean that which only has a toilet in it. In a multi-purpose facility, even if it's toilet plus sink, and if you're at the sink, you're not at the toilet. And he says, وَلَا يُجِيبُ مُؤَذِّنًا, one does not answer the mu'adhin. And we'll see the fiqh of answering the adhan in the Hanafi school, in a situation where you're in a state of prevention from answering the adhan, you can answer it after the adhan is given, as long as there's not excessive delay. The Maliki school, you can say it in advance as well. وَلَا يَنْظُرُ لِعَوْرَتِهِ, and one does not look to one's awrah, particularly one's private parts. Okay? Because it's contrary to adab, as Imam Tahtawi mentions. فَإِنَّهُ خِلَافُ الْأَدَبِ. Right? It's not makruh, but it's khilaf al-adab. There's no need to. And unless there's a need, like you got, you cut yourself or something, or whatever, that's different. Particularly, لا ينظر لعورته for the purpose of istinja, etc., because it's not from the sunnah. ولا إلى الخارج منها, and one does not look to what comes out from it. So, it helped me to see whether how my digestion is going. Well, eat the right thing and the right stuff will come out. Right? Like you're eating all kinds of garbage and you want to see, does it affect like that? There's many ways to check your health besides staring at your stools. Okay? So unless there's some particular need, even if doctors give you some advice, sometimes they give you advice that's contrary to the sunnah. There's no merit in it. Imam Shafi'i said, يُورِثُ النِّسْيَانِ. Okay? It's not a hadith, but they said it's not appropriate. وَلَا يَبْصُقْ وَلَا يَتَمَخَّرْ, one doesn't spit or clear one's throat. وَلَا يَتَنَحْنَحْ, and one does not make sounds. وَلَا يُكْثِرُ الْإِلْتِفَاتِ, one doesn't look around in the toilet. Right? Because these are all from this chilling out in the toilet, and one avoids that, so let alone more than that. وَلَا يَعْبَثُ بِبَدَنِهِ, and one does not idle with one's body. Okay? وَلَا يَرْفَعُ بَصَرَهُ إِلَى السَّمَاءِ, one does not raise one's gaze to the sky. Okay? These are adab, not obligations. Okay? Because the adab in the toilet is to make istihdar of one's lowliness before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Of course, how will you look to the sky? Because in many places where the toilet would be, would have an open roof. That was one of their ways of keeping it ventilated. So yeah, it'd be closed off, but the roof would be open, for example. Or have a window, right? You look up, you just look down, right? It's an adab. Okay? And also because the sky is a place where one looks to reflect on the higher signs of Allah. This is not the time to do that. Right? The sky is a great sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? وَلَا يُطِيلُ الْجُلُوسِ, right? And one does not lengthen one's staying there unless one needs to, right? Like one has some condition. لأنه يورث الباسور, because it leads to ailments. وَوَجَعَ الْكَبِدِ, and pain in the kabid. What's the kabid? Liver. And then how does one leave the toilet? He says, وَيَخْرُجُ مِنَ الْخَلَاءِ بِرِجْلِهِ الْيُمْنَى, and one leaves the toilet with one's right foot. لأنها أحق بالتقدم لنعمة الانصراف عن الأذى, because it's more deserving, the right is more deserving, because leaving the toilet is a blessing. You've left behind the harm that you got rid of. ومحل الشياطين, and a place of shayateen. Okay? ثم يقول بعد الخروج, then one says after leaving, الحمد لله الذي أذهب عني الأذى, all praise is due to Allah who has taken away from me the harm. بخروج الفضلات, by the exiting of when you're in an excrement. الممرضة بحبسها, that would make one sick if they remained within one. وعافاني, and who granted me complete wellness. بإبقاء خاصية الغذاء, by retaining for me the unique qualities of the nourishment of the food and drink. الذي لو أمسك كله أو خرج لكان مظنة الهلاك, which if all of it were maintained or all of it were to come out would cause one ruin. Right? وقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عند الخروج, and the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم said when leaving, غفرانك, your complete forgiveness, O Lord. وهو كناية عن الاعتراف بالقصور عن بلوغ حق الشكر عن حق شكر نعمة الإطعام, and this is an admission of falling short from reaching the full rights of gratitude for the blessing of Allah feeding one. وتصريف خاصية الغذاء, and for Allah nourishing one through what one ate. وتسهيل خروج الأذى, and facilitating the exiting of the filth. That are you fully grateful for the food and drink that you had? لسلامة البدن من الآلام, so that one's body can be free of pains. أو عن عدم الذكر باللسان حال التخلي, or because one did not engage in remembrance of Allah while relieving oneself. And what is the one thing that the people of paradise regret in paradise? Are those moments when they did not remember Allah in this life. Well, that's a quote-unquote regret. It's a regret without pain and sense of losing out. So it's a regret of recognition without pain or second guessing. That's how the commentators explain. Right? Okay, so we praise Allah, and if one says both, Alhamdulillah الذي أذهب عني الأذى وعافاني, and then to say غفرانك, saying both is atam. There's a number of other du'as of the Prophet ﷺ as well. If one is using the toilet and in the washroom, when one gets up from the toilet, upon covering one's awrah, one can say it then. So you're going toilet to sink, one can say it there, before one goes to use the sink for washing up. And of course, course, it's recommended to make wudu, to remain on wudu. So if one uses one's toilet, even if one's in a rush, one makes wudu. Okay? That's, to remain upon wudu is recommended. And they say that if one is in a rush, then one should intend the sunnah that if one's in a rush and you can only make a minimum wudu, making the minimum wudu is superior to not doing wudu. And one intends the sunnah of the one who sometimes washed only once. Imam al-Kashmiri and others mention this. Mullah al-Qari mentions it as well. On those occasions when one cannot wash fully, then one intends to follow the one who did it. Sometimes one has the reward of following the sunnah fully in that sense. And one has the intention that if I had the full time, I would do it fully. Okay? So if one's in a rush, one has to get to class at home, then the minimum wudu shouldn't take 20 seconds. But if something important is happening to delay getting to it, because one is making wudu, إِسْتَرْكُ الْأَدْنَى لِلْأَعْلَى. إِسْتَرْكُ الْأَعْلَى لِلْأَدْنَى, leaving what's more important for what's lesser. So if doing this sunnah wudu would cause one to miss even one rak'ah, then catching the rak'ah is more important than doing the sunnahs of wudu. Let alone missing the prayer, which is foolishness. I mean, complete foolishness. Similarly, if the dars that one attends is happening, then it's superior to get to the dars and not be in wudu, then to be late for the dars and make wudu. But if one is going to make wudu and makes a minimum wudu and gets there without further delay, etc. Then he says, rahimahullah ta'ala, فصل في أحكام الوضوء, the section on the rulings of wudu. Let's read the method first. He says, أركان الوضوء أربعة. The intervals of wudu are 4. And وهي فرائض. And those integrals are its obligations. Of course, it's pointing to a subtle meaning that is lost to a lot of people, that the obligatory actions are not necessarily the integrals of an action. Right? And you can see examples of things that the ulama did not consider arkan, but they consider them fard in the Hadiyah al-Ala'iyya, for example. The subtle distinction, we'll talk about it when we get to the prayer. So he says, وَهُوَ بِضَمِّ الْوَاوِ وَفَتْحِهَا مَصْدَرٌ. You can say wudu and wadu, and it's a masdar. Now, in the Arabic language, you can say wudu and wadu, and they have essentially the same meaning, with some discussion revolving around it. But اصطلح الفقهاء, the fuqaha made an istilah, وبفتحها فقط ما يتوضأ به. الوضوء is what you make wudu with. أي الماء. الوضوء is الماء. Unless in classic Arabic, no one calls it that really, practically. وهو لغة مأخوذ من الوضاء. In its root sense, it is taken from وضاء, from radiance. والحسن من الوضاءة والحسن والنظافة. So wudu is taken from 3 meanings. وضاء, radiance. Number 2, al-husn, beauty. And نظافة, cleanliness. And all 3 meanings are found in the ritual wudu, because it beautifies you in appearance, it makes you clean. It, gives you seemingly an appearance, and it cleanses you, and it makes you luminous spiritually, but also physically. Like the Europeans were dazzled by the beauty of Muslim women when they came to the Muslim world. Right? And one of the simplest reasons is Muslim women made wudu and ghusl. they just stayed clean. You know, and in Europe, for the longest time, it wasn't like, was it the author of, Samuel Pepys, whatever his name is, wrote the famous diaries, and he was there when London burnt down. He, like people would go months without taking. Is it off? Without taking a shower. Anyways. ويقال وضوء الرجل أي صار وضيئا. You can say a person, وضوء الرجل أي صار وضيئا. He became radiant or beautiful or clean. So this is the lexical sense. Right? And in some hadiths, it's used in the lexical sense. Right? It's come الوضوء قبل الطعام بركة. Cleaning one's hands before eating. And some said that the meaning of wudu in the Arabic language is a little more specific than just نظافة. It's النظافة بالماء باستعمال الماء. It's cleansing is these meanings with using water. Right? مع الغسل. And وشرعا, how do you describe wudu shar'an? It's tricky, right? So a defensive definition of wudu is نظافة مخصوصة. It's a specific way of cleaning oneself. And the reason this is done is that it is possible to have wudu without washing your face. How can you have wudu without washing your face? If your face is injured. It's possible to have wudu without washing your arms if your arms are injured. It's possible to have wudu without wiping your head if your head is injured. So, now one answer to that though, Qadi Khan said that حالات الضرورة خارجة عن أحكام الشرع. That Omar, the situation. What's that for?
Extended to
the situations of necessity are exceptions from. I have a longer cable there too. The situations of necessity are exceptions from the general rules of the Sharia. So, not working? Plug it back. In that pouch, there's another cable. In حالات الضرورة مستثناة من قواعد الشرع. That the situations of necessity are excluded from the general rulings of the Sharia. Right? You can't take all of those into account. So that's why Imam al-Tahtawi quotes Badr al-Din al-Aini, I believe, that الأحسن ما قاله العيني الإمام العيني رحمه الله أنه لو شرع أنه في الشرع غسل الأعضاء الثلاثة ومسح الرأس. Right? That the definition given by Imam al-Aini is that Shar'an it is washing the three limbs and wiping the head. That is wudu. Right? Because the darura is understood to be accepted anyways.
It's wire. Pardon? Someone was borrowing it.
شرعا نظافة المخصوصة here, you know, Tahawi points out that Al-Aini said that defining it as being غسل الأعضاء الثلاثة, washing the three limbs and wiping the head is superior. Why? Because the exceptions are understood to be excluded. Right? That when one defines something, one defines it بالغالب. Right? One doesn't account for the darura. ففيه المعنى اللغوي. So this definition includes the lexical meaning. Why? لأنه يحسن أعضاء الحسن الوضوء, because they beautify the limbs of the one who does wudu well. في الدنيا بالتنظيف, in this life by cleaning them, وفي الآخرة بالتحجيل بالتحجيل, which is by making those limbs radiate. Right? Okay. And this is of course al-ghurra wa tahjeel. Ghurra is to make the front of one's head radiate, and tahjeel is on the arms and legs. So he says we better say bil-ghurra wa tahjeel, but this is called iktifa. Where in Arabic it's common. You mention one thing but you intend two. Okay? So for example, it's come in hadith, the Prophet would often eat only the aswadain, consume the aswadain. What are the aswadain? التمر والماء. Where only one of them is aswad, only one of them is dark. They call the two dark ones, why? Because one of them is dark. But sometimes you mention one thing, okay? تقيكم الحر, right, in the Quran. What is it? But it's understood, the ulama said, that it shields you from heat, والبرد, from cold. So this is very common in Arabic. Right? So here, بالتحجيل, and it beautifies one in the hereafter by making one's limbs radiant, which is al-ghurra والتحجيل. We've seen that. للقيام بخدمة المولى, in order to direct oneself to serve one's master, right? Through worshiping him, right? Which is why we were created. Then there's a question: why mention wudu first when ghusl is more important, insofar as its consequence is greater? What ghusl prevents is wider. And if you do ghusl, you have wudu, but if you have wudu, you don't have ghusl. Okay? So it says وقدم أي الوضوء على الغسل. wudu is mentioned before ghusl, لأن الله تعالى قدمه عليه. Because Allah mentioned wudu first before ghusl in the ayah of Tahara, the 6th verse of the 5th surah. وأيضا لكثرته, because it is more common, right? Right? Because لكثرته ولأنه جزء منه. Sometimes you mention a part and then you mention the whole. Because the wudu is one part of ghusl. وله سبب وشرط وحكم وركن وصفة. So he says, wudu has a cause and a condition and a ruling and an integral and a description. And he'll mention all of these. Right? And he'll go into each of these. And there's just one more thing to mention, of course, is that Imam Tahtawi touches upon this a little bit, that previous people did wudu. So the relied upon position is wudu as an act is not min khususiyati hadhihi al-ummah. They differ. The previous people did wash up before they worship. We cannot say decisively whether they had the same wudu or not. But there are hadiths that indicate that at least the prophets did. Right? The Prophet ﷺ washed once only. It says, هَذَا وُضُوءٌ لَا يَقْبَلُ اللَّهُ الصَّلَاةَ دُونَهُ. This is a wudu. Allah does not accept prayer with less than this. Because he only washed once. Alayhi salatu wasalam. But then he washed fully, washing each of the limbs 3 times, and said, هَذَا وُضُوئي وَوُضُوءُ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ مِنْ قَبْلِ. This is my wudu and the wudu of the prophets before me. Now, how is it the wudu of the prophets before him? Allah, it is that they made the same wudu. But there are other interpretive possibilities. That from now on, this is the wudu that they would have done. But that's a little far-fetched. So it would appear to, and if the prophets did it, then their people were commanded to follow the prophets in what they did in worship. So, but the house says we don't know what the wudu was before. So we cannot say decisively that this wudu was unique to our ummah. But what is unique for the ummah is a number of things. Amongst them is al-ghurra wa tahjeel. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the promise that the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ will be distinguished between all ummahs by the radiance of their limbs and their faces and manes min athar al-wudu, right? From the traces of wudu. And one of the wisdoms in that is that we just make wudu more than any other people's. There's a practical component that we make wudu 5 times a day. It's righteous. Anyone who's committed to righteous, to virtue, would remain on wudu. So they keep renewing their wudu. And it's also minha ilahiyya. It's a gift that Allah, min khususiyat al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that on the day of resurrection, his community will come radiant. Hatta al-athil minhum, even the sinner amongst them. They'll have this radiance even if it's dulled by their sin. Right? Imam Shadli said that لو كشف الله عن نور العاصي لملأ ما بين السماوات والأرض. If Allah uncovered the light that the sin عن المؤمن العاصي, if Allah uncovered the light possessed by the sinful believer, it would illuminate that which is between the heavens and the earth. Because this is a believer. It's not something small. So the ghurra wa tahjeel, one in terms of Allah granting it this radiance in the hereafter that has traces in this life. But also the istihbab of italat al-ghurra wa tahjeel, of extending one's washing and wiping. Yes.
About the one that you just mentioned, that Asi Shifa, Nur al-Asi. Was this a hadith?
No, this from the words of Imam al-Shadili. But there's many things to uncover, right? The hurma of Ahl la ilaha illallah, the hadith al-Bitaqa, right? That on the day of resurrection someone will come, their good deeds are placed on their scales, and they're heavier than expected. Their good deeds, they're lighter than expected, and their bad deeds are placed on the scales, and they're heavier than expected, and the good deeds fly off the scales. They have nothing left. The angels are getting ready to take this sinful believer towards their punishment when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses them. أخرجوا البطاقة, bring out the small card. What does the small card have written on it? The Shahada, La ilaha illallah Muhammadun Rasulullah. Right? That's placed on the scale and outweighs all their sins. When the poet said, Muhammad kabadahu e jahannam tubi sunnah. I am a follower of Muhammad, O hell, do listen up. Right? That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's one of the mabahith. Imam al-Haskafi has a beautiful thing, because one of the interesting things is what is the central verse on the wudu? Is ayat al-Tahara. Surah 5, verse 6. There's a little ishkal. Where was that revealed? It was revealed in Medina. When was wudu legislated? Wudu was legislated in Mecca. لم يصلي النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قط إلا بوضوء. The Prophet never made prayer without wudu. We know that after revelation came, Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam struck the ground with a wing, water gushed forth, and he demonstrated the wudu to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he prayed with him. And there's hadiths about that. And there's so many descriptions of the wudu of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if it was already legislated, why have Quran revealed for it? So Al-Haskafi mentioned a number of points. Amongst them is لِتَقْرِيرِ الْحُكْم. The descriptive hadiths, as time passes, people could become confused. What are the obligations? What are the recommendations? The verse, one makes clear what are the obligations. The verse is قَطْعِيُّ ثبوت وقطعي الدلالة. The verse is decisive both in its affirmation and its indication. Also, because it gathers all these rulings of purification as only divine speech can. That verse contains several hundred rulings in one verse. Also, because the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put the verse, so one is for the ruling to be clear and decisive and preserved, but also for all these ahkam that arise from the verse. It's a marvel. All of Tahara, we're going to say, let's read Ayat al-Tahara, all of it's contained there, and go home. If you could really think, because all of it needs to be deduced from there. But also, in order for the ikhtilaf of the ulama to arise, because the ikhtilaf of the ulama is a rahmah, right? And more. And it mentions a number of points of benefit there, and Ibn Abdin details this out. So that verse of Tahara is deserving of our attention. Here, Imam al-Tahtawi, right? Because he begins, أركان الوضوء أربعة وهي فرائضه. The integrals of wudu are 4, and these are its obligations. Okay. Imam al-Tahtawi here has a discussion that is necessary reading, and it's almost necessary diagramming. Do you have it in the Mi'raj al-Najah that we quoted?
الفرض قسمان قطعيا.
Yeah, you're looking at Mi'raj al-Najah. Yeah, so the author of the Hashi on the Maraqi mentions this as well. That's very useful. Okay, because the fard, understanding the fard is important, and he breaks it down. So we'll begin from here. We'll stop here today, but do diagram this section. And the basic summary is that texts come to us in two parts. There's a thubut and there's a dilala. How the text has been established, an evidentiary text, a text of the Quran or the Sunnah, has jihat al-thubut, is how the text is affirmed as being sound. And that thubut could be qat'i or dhanni. It could be decisive or probabilistic. And then the second part of the text is how clearly it indicates the meaning. And that meaning could be indicated qat'an or dhannan. It also could be qat'i or dhanni, decisive or non-decisive. So in that sense, texts are four types. قطعي الثبوت والدلالة، قطعي الثبوت ظني الدلالة، ظني الثبوت قطعي الدلالة، ظني الثبوت وظني الدلالة. Right? So could be decisive or non-decisive in affirmation, and in both cases it could be decisive or non-decisive in its indication. And depending on the level of the text is the level of the ruling between the fard, the wajib, and the other rulings. So he breaks this down nicely. So we'll go through that. And he has a few other things on that. Then the fard is also fard ayn and fard kifaya. Personally obligatory and communally obligatory. Then he goes into the discussions on that and a few other points. And what is entailed by the fard, leaving the sunnah, leaving the mustahab, etc. So it's a good summarized discussion. So we will look at that on which day?
Wednesday.
On Wednesday, 5 to 7, بإذن ta'ala. And we continue from there. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.